Ardennes, Belgium, December 20, 1944, 04:23. Corporal William Doc Brennan woke to the sound of teeth chattering. Not his. 3 weeks earlier, he'd learned to clamp his jaw while sleeping to stop the noise. It was Private Morrison, curled up less than a yard away, shivering uncontrollably beneath two soaked army blankets. The temperature was -18 degrees C. But with the wind slicing through the Ardennes trees like invisible blades, the wind chill dropped to -32 degrees C. Doc crawled out of the foxhole, a makeshift trench dug in the frozen ground, and surveyed the camp of 2nd Platoon, E Company, 394th Infantry Regiment. 42 men spread across 18 defensive positions along a 2-kilometer line. Command had sent them to hold that ground for 72 hours, tops. That was 6 days ago. And now, as the Ardennes offensive exploded around them, they were surrounded. No reinforcements, no supplies, no way to pull back. But what was killing the men wasn't the Germans. It was the cold. Doc looked at his hands. 3 fingertips on his left hand were white, the first stage of frostbite. He rubbed them hard, feeling the sharp pain that meant there was still circulation. There was still time. In the distance, artillery rumbled like dry thunder. The Germans were advancing, and 2nd Platoon was freezing in place. "Doc," Lieutenant Hal Mercer's voice came from behind. He was young, 23, but looked 50 after 2 weeks in the Ardennes. "We've got 3 more cases of trench foot. Private Hayes can't feel his toes, and Thompson's coughing up blood." Doc nodded slowly. Trench foot, hypothermia, pneumonia, frostbite. He treated 17 cases in the last 4 days, but medical supplies were running out. Morphine, 3 doses left. Bandages, enough for maybe 5 wounds. Sulfa powder, almost none. And the temperature kept dropping. "Lieutenant, we need shelter. Anything. If we spend another night exposed like this, we'll start losing men not to wounds but to the weather." Mercer looked at the sky. It was lead gray, heavy. "Forecast says snow tonight, heavy snow." Doc felt something freeze inside him, something beyond the physical cold. How many men are combat effective? Maybe 25. The rest are surviving. Doc closed his eyes. 25 men to hold 2 kilometers of front, against a German offensive that had crushed entire lines in a matter of hours. "I have an idea," Doc said almost to himself. Mercer looked at him. "About what?" "About keeping them alive, but I'm going to need salt, a lot of salt." The lieutenant frowned. "Salt?" "Salt, sir, and cloth, and fire, trust me." Mercer hesitated, then nodded. "Do whatever you have to do, Doc, because if we don't do something, there won't be a platoon left by tomorrow." Doc was already running back to his medic's pack. Inside, wrapped in oilcloth, was a small notebook. He opened it to the marked page where, 3 months earlier during a medical training at Camp Kilmer, New Jersey, he had written, "Field treatment for severe hypothermia in the absence of medical facilities. Apply warm saline moisture to extremities to stimulate peripheral circulation and slow tissue necrosis." Source: Dr. Heinrich Hoffmann, University of Berlin, 1936. Doc had never tested the technique. No one had. It was an obscure medical theory mentioned in a single paper he'd stumbled across in the base library. But now, surrounded by snow and death, it was the only thing he had. William Brennan was never meant to be a combat medic. The son of a Boston pharmacist, he'd studied chemistry at the University of Massachusetts for 2 years before being drafted in 1943. He wanted to be a researcher. He wanted a lab, far from battlefields, developing medicines. The Army had other plans. During basic training, the instructors noticed that Brennan read a lot. While other soldiers played cards or slept, he devoured medical manuals, old scientific articles, anything on physiology and emergency care. He didn't do it out of ambition. He did it out of fear, fear of not knowing enough when someone needed him. So when the Army asked for volunteers for advanced medical training, Brennan raised his hand. Not because he wanted the front line, but because he believed that if he had to be there, he might as well be useful. It was during that training, on a rainy afternoon in August 1944, that he found Dr. Heinrich Hoffmann's article. It lay in a stack of old medical publications in the camp library, yellowed papers, some in German, others in French, most ignored for decades. Brennan, who had learned basic German in school, leafed through them out of curiosity until he saw the title, Behandlung von Erfrierungen unter Feldbedingungen, treatment of frostbite under field conditions. The article described experiments conducted by Dr. Hoffmann during Alpine expeditions in the 1930s. He had found that, when applied correctly, moist heat combined with salt could stimulate blood flow in frozen extremities far more effectively than dry heat. Salt dissolved in warm water created a hypertonic solution that helped draw fluids back into damaged tissues, while heat reopened capillaries. It was elegant, simple, and completely untested in combat. Brennan copied the procedure into his notebook. He didn't know if he'd ever use it, but something about the method felt right, intuitive, as if it made sense in a way other treatments didn't. Now, 3 months later, freezing in the Ardennes, he was about to find out whether Hoffmann was right. Doc gathered whatever he could find. 6 ration cans worth of table salt, 2 metal canteens, 3 strips of cloth torn from discarded uniforms, and a small portable stove burning solid fuel. He set up an improvised station behind a fallen tree, sheltered from the wind. Then he got to work. First, he melted snow in 1 canteen. Then he added salt, not too much, but enough to make a concentrated solution. Hoffmann's ratio was about 3% salt to water, slightly saltier than human tears. As he worked, soldiers started watching. "Doc, what the hell are you doing?" Sergeant McKinnon, a 32-year-old veteran of Sicily and Normandy, approached with a skeptical look. "Preparing a frostbite treatment." "With salt water?" "Yes, Sergeant." McKinnon barked a short laugh. "Doc, you're telling me you're gonna rub salt into frozen wounds? That's nuts. It'll hurt like hell." "They're not wounds, Sergeant. They're tissues on the verge of necrosis. And I'm not rubbing salt in. I'm applying it as moist heat with compresses." The sergeant shook his head. "You read that somewhere." "I did." "Anyone ever done it before?" Doc hesitated. "On Alpine expeditions in the 30s. "In the Alps?" McKinnon crossed his arms. "Doc, we're not climbing mountains. We're in a damn war zone, freezing to death, and you want to experiment with salt water." "I want to keep them alive, Sergeant. And if we don't try something different, we're going to start losing toes, maybe feet, maybe whole men." McKinnon stared at Doc for a long beat, then sighed. "You've saved my hide twice, Doc. Once at St. Lo, once near Aachen, so I'll trust you. But if this doesn't work, the men will blame you, not me." "I know, Sergeant." McKinnon turned to leave, then stopped. "And Doc, if it works, you're going to have to teach the rest of us, because if you take a bullet, we'll need to know how to do it ourselves." Doc nodded. "I'll teach." By 14:00, he had 6 improvised compresses ready, cloths soaked in warm saline, wrapped in waterproof packets cut from rain capes. Each would hold heat for roughly 15 to 20 minutes. Then he went to the foxhole where Private Hayes lay motionless, feet swaddled in dirty rags. "Hayes, I'm going to try something new. It'll hurt at first, but I need you to hang on. Understood?" Hayes, hollow-eyed and blue-lipped, just nodded. Doc peeled away the rags. Hayes's feet were chalk-white with gray blotches on the toes. 2nd stage frostbite, maybe 3rd. He set the first warm saline compress on Hayes's right foot. The private screamed. Hayes's scream sliced through the camp like an alarm. 3 soldiers sprinted to the foxhole with rifles up, thinking they were under attack. "It's okay," Doc shouted, holding Hayes by the shoulders. "It's the treatment, he's all right." But Hayes didn't look all right. He writhed, eyes bulging, face twisted in agony. Get it off of me." Doc kept the compress in place. "Hayes, listen. The pain means circulation's coming back. If it didn't hurt, it would mean the tissue's dead. You have to hold on." "I can't, it hurts too much." McKinnon dropped into the hole and pinned Hayes's arms. "Soldier, you'll hold on because I'm ordering you to hold on. You hear me?" Hayes groaned but stopped thrashing. Doc kept the compress on for 10 more minutes. Slowly, very slowly, color began to return to Hayes's toes. The chalk white turned pale pink, then an angry red. And the pain gradually eased. When Doc finally removed the compress, Hayes was sweating, spent but breathing evenly. His toes were still red and swollen, but they had color. They had life. "How do you feel?" Doc asked softly. Hayes stared at his feet as if he couldn't believe them. I can feel them. It hurts, but I can feel them." Doc closed his eyes and exhaled. It worked. Hoffman's treatment worked. Then came the hard part. "Hayes, I'm going to have to do it again. Every 4 hours for at least 2 days. And it'll hurt every time. Can you do that?" Hayes looked at Doc, then at his own feet, then back at Doc. "If it means keeping my feet, Doc, I'll do it." Over the next hours, Doc repeated the treatment on 6 more men. Each one screamed. Each one writhed. And each one, eventually, watched color creep back into frozen extremities. But not everyone thought it was worth it. Private Kowalski, a 19-year-old from Chicago, refused. "You're not torturing me with salt water, Doc. That's insane. I'll take my chances." Doc didn't force him. He couldn't. So he treated those who agreed, logging the results in his notebook. Core temperature rising, skin color improving, circulation returning. And slowly, as afternoon gave way to night, something changed in the camp. The men stopped laughing at Doc's salt water, and they started paying attention. Because the ones who were treated were alive, and the ones who weren't were getting worse. At 1930, the snow began. Not soft, storybook snow. A brutal blizzard, 50-kilometer-per-hour winds driving flakes that cut skin like glass shrapnel. Visibility dropped below 10 meters. The temperature plunged to minus 23 degrees C. And 2nd Platoon was fully exposed. "Everyone into the holes. Now," Mercer shouted, though his voice barely carried over the howl of the wind. Men crammed into shallow trenches, pulling tarps and blankets over their heads. But there was no real shelter. The wind found every crack, every opening. Snow piled onto them, turning foxholes into icy graves. Doc moved from position to position, checking each man. Morrison, violent shivering, hypothermia setting in. Jenkins, blue lips, shallow breathing. Parker, unconscious, weak pulse. Then at 21:15, he heard the sound he feared. "Medic, medic, KOWLSK, ice out." Doc stumbled through the snow, falling, scrambling up again. He reached Kowalski's foxhole and found the kid on his side, motionless, eyes half closed. Doc ripped off a glove and pressed 2 fingers to Kowalski's neck. The pulse was there but faint, skin like ice, hands and feet completely white. "Severe hypothermia, advanced stage." "Mercer," Doc shouted, "we need shelter, now. If we don't get these men out of the wind, we'll lose them." Mercer crawled to him. "We don't have shelter, Doc. Closest thing is a barn 3 clicks out, and it's behind German lines." "Then improvise. Use tarps, trees, anything, put up windbreaks." Mercer hesitated only a second, then started barking orders. "McKinnon, grab 6 men. We're building windscreens with branches and tarps. Move." While soldiers worked frantically, Doc set to work on Kowalski. He heated snow melt, added salt, soaked a compress. Then carefully, he wrapped the young man's frozen hands. Kowalski groaned but didn't wake. Doc kept going, feet, hands, neck, any area where circulation had stopped. Compresses swapped every 15 minutes kept warm over a tiny stove burning precious fuel. 2 hours later, Kowalski opened his eyes. "Doc," his voice was a ragged whisper. "I'm here, you blacked out, but you're back." Kowalski looked at his hands, swaddled in improvised packs. You used that salt thing." "I did. I thought it was crazy." Doc managed a tired smile. "I thought so too. Sometimes crazy's all we've got." Kowalski closed his eyes again, but this time he was sleeping, not passed out, sleeping. And when the sun rose on December 21, all 42 men of 2nd Platoon were still alive. Over the next 48 hours, the Ardennes offensive intensified. The Germans drove in all directions, but 2nd Platoon remained cut off, unable to retreat, unable to be relieved. Snow kept falling. Temperatures swung between -20 degrees C and -25 degrees C. But the men were alive. Doc had set up a system. Every 4 hours, he treated critical cases, those showing advanced signs of frostbite or hypothermia. Every 8 hours, he treated everyone else preventively, applying saline compresses for 10 minutes to hands and feet to stimulate circulation. The procedure consumed resources, salt, fuel, cloth, but it worked. And gradually, the soldiers themselves began to learn. McKinnon was first. He watched Doc prepare compresses 5 times before asking, "Teach me." Doc spent an hour going through it. Salt ratio, water temperature, application technique, signs the treatment was working. McKinnon absorbed it with the same seriousness he used cleaning his rifle. Then Thompson, then Hayes, then 3 more. Within 2 days, half the platoon knew how to prepare and apply saline compresses. They started treating each other in shifts, saving Doc's energy for the worst cases. But not everything was a success. Private Martinez, who had refused the initial treatment, developed gangrene in 3 toes on his left foot. Doc didn't have enough antibiotics. No surgical kit. All he could do was amputate the toes with a sterilized knife and pray the infection didn't spread. Martinez lived, but he lost part of his foot. And Doc carried that weight. "It wasn't your fault," Mercer said on the night of December 23. "He refused treatment. That was his choice." "He refused because he thought it was crazy," Doc answered quietly. "And maybe it was. Maybe I was experimenting on human lives." "You were saving human lives. Look around, Doc. 40 men who should be dead are still breathing. How many platoons can say the same?" Doc didn't answer, but he knew. None. Radio reports, when the radio worked, spoke of whole units lost, not to combat but to the weather, platoons that simply stopped responding, men found dead in their trenches, frozen where they slept. The Ardennes winter was killing more American soldiers than the Germans. But 2nd Platoon held on. And on December 24, Christmas Eve, something unexpected happened. A messenger arrived. A soldier from B Company, wounded, exhausted, but alive. He had crossed 3 kilometers of contested ground to bring a message. "Lieutenant Mercer," he said, voice shaking with cold, "Command wants to know how you're still alive. Every other unit in your sector has reported severe exposure casualties. You're the only one still operational." Mercer looked at Doc, then back to the messenger. "Tell Command we've got a medic who reads too much, and who doesn't let anyone die." December 25, 1944, Christmas. The snow finally stopped. The sky was clear for the first time in 6 days, and on the eastern horizon through the Ardennes trees, the men of 2nd Platoon could see smoke, field kitchens, not battle. Reinforcements were coming. At 10:30, the first Allied patrol reached the platoon, men of the 82nd Airborne sent to re-establish the defensive line. They expected to find survivors, a handful maybe. Instead, they found 42 men, exhausted, frozen, some wounded but all alive. The patrol's captain, A 35-year-old veteran named Hartwell climbed out of his jeep and walked slowly among 2nd Platoon's positions. He looked at the improvised foxholes, the windbreaks of branches and tarps, the little stoves still burning. Then he saw the compresses, dozens of them hanging to dry from low branches, cloths crusted with dried salt. "What the hell is this?" he asked. Mercer stepped up. "Frostbite treatment, sir. Saline compresses. Our medic developed a protocol." Hartwell frowned. "Saline compresses, is that in any manual?" "No, sir, it's in Doc Brennan's head, and in his notebooks." Hartwell scanned for Doc and found him sitting on a fallen log, wrapping a soldier's foot with clean bandages. The medic looked 50, though he was no more than 25. His eyes were sunken, his hands trembled from exhaustion. "Soldier," Hartwell called. Doc stood unsteady. "Sir." "You the medic?" "Yes, sir." "How many men did you lose?" "None to exposure, sir. One to shrapnel. He's being treated now, but he's stable." Hartwell was quiet for a long moment. "None to exposure?" "No, sir." F Company, 5 kilometers from here, lost 18 men, froze to death. D Company lost 23. A company's 3rd platoon was found yesterday, 7 survivors out of 41. Doc said nothing. Hartwell stepped closer. "How did you do it?" "Salt, sir, moist heat, and a lot of repetition." "You invent that?" "No, sir. A German doctor published on it in the 30s. I just adapted it to field conditions." Hartwell slowly shook his head. "You need to write this down, every detail, every step, because if it works here, it works anywhere, and we've got 80,000 men freezing in this damned forest." Doc nodded. "I'll write it, sir." And that night, December 25, 1944, while church bells rang in distant, liberated villages, Doc Brennan sat by the light of an oil lantern and wrote. He wrote about salt ratios, water temperatures, application techniques, signs of improvement and signs of failure. He wrote for 4 hours until his hands ached and his eyes burned. When he finished, he had created the first field protocol for treating frostbite in a combat zone. A protocol that, in the weeks to come, would be copied by hand and pass from medic to medic, company to company. A protocol that would save thousands of lives. January 1945, the Ardennes offensive had been contained, Allied lines stabilized, and Doc Brennan was summoned to division headquarters. He expected recognition, maybe a commendation, at the very least official approval to distribute his protocol. Instead, he found a medical tribunal. 3 senior medical officers sat at the table, majors and above. In the center, Colonel M.C. Arthur Pemberton, a 52-year-old who'd served in the Great War and oversaw medical procedures for the entire European theater. "Corporal Brennan," Pemberton began without looking up from his papers, "you are here because you disseminated, without authorization, an unapproved medical protocol that contradicts established Army Medical Corps guidelines." Doc blinked. "Sir, your saline compress treatment appears in no military medical manual. It has not been tested. It has not been approved. Yet you taught it to non-medical personnel and applied it to dozens of soldiers without proper supervision. Sir, with respect, the treatment saved." "The treatment," Pemberton cut in, finally raising his eyes, "could have caused severe harm if misapplied. Saline solutions on frozen tissue can induce osmotic shock. Excess heat can cause premature reperfusion and necrosis. You got lucky, Corporal. Luck is not medicine." Doc felt heat rise in him. "Luck, sir? 42 men survived 6 days at 20 below, fully exposed. The company next to us lost half its strength. That's not luck. That's a working protocol." Another officer, Major Hendricks, leaned forward. "Corporal, the issue isn't whether it works. The issue is that you aren't authorized to create protocols. You're a combat medic, not a researcher, not a licensed physician. Then license the protocol, test it, approve it, but do something because men are dying out there and I gave them a way to live. Pemberton closed the folder. Your protocol will be reviewed by a medical board. If approved, it will be incorporated into official procedures. Until then, you are prohibited from teaching or applying it without direct supervision by a senior medical officer. Understood? Doc clenched his fists, and while the board reviews, while they assess, how many men freeze waiting for approval? That's not your concern, Corporal. Dismissed. Doc left the room in silence. But he didn't stop. That night he made 50 handwritten copies of his protocol, and he distributed them to medics, to sergeants, to anyone willing to learn. He disobeyed orders again. Because in the Ardennes, Doc had learned something. Sometimes saving lives means ignoring the people telling you to stop. March 1945. The war in Europe was nearing its end. Doc Brennan was never promoted. He never received a medal. His insubordination kept him far from any official recognition. But his protocol spread. From medic to medic, unit to unit, without approval, without fanfare, without ceremony, simply because it worked. In February, a doctor with the 101st Airborne used the protocol to save 16 men after a forced 30-kilometer march through deep snow. In March, a British unit, after hearing about the technique from some crazy American, adapted the procedure and cut frostbite casualties by 60%. In April, field hospitals in Germany began using variations of the treatment on civilians rescued from concentration camps, people so starved and exposed that frostbite was nearly universal. And in May, when the war finally ended, thousands of soldiers went home with all their fingers, all their limbs, alive, because someone somewhere had learned the salt trick. But William Brennan's name appeared in no official report. When he was discharged in August 1945, he went back to Boston, re-enrolled at the university, finished his chemistry degree, spent 30 years as a hospital lab technician, developing saline solutions for IV therapy. He never spoke about the Ardennes, never mentioned the protocol. When veterans of 2nd Platoon tried to contact him for reunions, he politely declined. "I just did my job," he'd say. "You're the ones who had to endure." In 1978, a medical researcher at Johns Hopkins published a study on field treatment of hypothermia using hypertonic saline solutions. It was a detailed paper, citing dozens of successful World War II cases. William Brennan's name did not appear once. But in the acknowledgments there was one line. Based on field techniques developed by anonymous combat medics during the Ardennes campaign, 1944–1945. Anonymous. Doc read the article, smiled, and filed it away. Because for him, it was never about recognition. It was about 42 men who woke up on Christmas morning, all alive. Boston, Massachusetts, 1982. William Brennan was in his favorite chair reading the Sunday paper when the doorbell rang. He was 63 now, retired 2 years, enjoying a quiet life with his wife and 3 grandchildren who visited on weekends. He opened the door and found a man of about 60, a bit stooped, wearing a veteran's coat with the 394th Infantry insignia. "Doc Brennan?" the man asked, voice trembling. Doc studied him for a long moment, then he recognized him. "Morrison." "Yes, sir, Private David Morrison. I was in the foxhole next to yours, the one you treated first, December 20th. Doc smiled, warmth kindling in his chest. "Morrison, come in, come in." They sat in the living room. Morrison held a yellowed envelope. "Doc, it took me 37 years to find you. Did you change your name when you came back?" "No, I just didn't want to be found." Morrison nodded slowly. "I understand, but I had to come. There's something I never told you." He opened the envelope and pulled out a faded photo. A young man, a smiling woman, two small children. "This is my family, Doc. My wife, Margaret. My kids, David Jr. and Susan. Taken in 1947, 2 years after I came home." Doc looked at the picture, not understanding yet. Morrison went on, voice breaking. "Doc, when you treated me that night, my feet were white, completely white. I couldn't feel anything below my ankles. I was starting to accept I was going to lose them." He paused, wiping his eyes. "But you didn't let that happen. You came back every 4 hours, even when you were exhausted, even when others needed you. You changed those compresses, checked my toes, ordered me to wiggle them. And little by little, Doc, little by little, they came back." Morrison stood and slowly took off his right shoe, then his sock. His toes were there, all of them, a little crooked, scarred, but functional. "I danced at my daughter's wedding last year, Doc. I danced, with these feet you saved." Doc felt his throat tighten. Morrison pulled the sock back on. "So I came because you needed to know. You saved my life, but not just that. You saved the life I lived afterward, every step I took, every time I held my kids, every morning I got out of bed and put my feet on the floor." He held out his hand. "Thank you, Doc, for not giving up, for not accepting what everyone else said, for believing in something no one else believed." Doc shook his hand, and for the first time in 37 years, he let himself feel the weight of what he'd done. Epilogue: The storm that still saves lives. Present day. Today, field treatment of hypothermia and frostbite is standard protocol in armed forces around the world. Hypertonic saline solutions are routinely used in medical emergencies to stimulate peripheral circulation. Warm, moist compresses are taught in every advanced first aid course. And somewhere buried in old military archives, there's a handwritten notebook. Yellowed pages, faded ink, simple diagrams showing how to prepare, apply, and monitor saline compresses under combat conditions. The notebook has no author's name. Only an inscription on the first page: "For those still out there freezing, don't give up." In 2019, a group of military historians located records from 2nd Platoon, E Company, 394th Regiment. They found something extraordinary. During the 7 coldest days of the Ardennes offensive, that platoon suffered 0 cold exposure fatalities. 0. While units around them lost half their men, 42 soldiers survived intact. The historians looked for explanations. Better gear, no. Better shelters, no. Luck, statistically impossible. Then they found a single line in a January 1945 medical report. Non-conventional thermal treatment techniques were applied by field medical personnel. Results: highly effective. Recommendation: further investigation. No names, no credit, just results. Because in the end, Doc Brennan didn't want glory. He wanted his men to go home, and they did. All of them. And for him, that was always enough. Doc Brennan disobeyed orders, twice. He risked his career, his reputation, maybe his freedom, and he saved lives doing it. So here's my question for you. If you were Doc Brennan that night, with an old notebook, an untested theory, and commanders telling you to stop, would you have tried? Would you have risked everything to do what you believed was right, knowing it could go wrong?